Software development teams today have a mandate to be agile, flexible, and cost-efficient as they strive to meet the rising demand for increasingly complex business applications, rich in new features and functionality. In order to keep pace with this frenetic development environment, organizations are turning away from the traditional models in order to more readily adapt to this brave new world of software development. In this report, we'll take a close look at Agile Application Lifecycle Management and DevOps. We'll learn why and how these concepts can enable development teams to deliver today's multifaceted business applications successfully in a timely and cost-efficient manner. This program features expert Bob Aiello, a consultant and software engineer specializing in software process improvement, including software configuration and release management. He has more than 25 years of experience as a technical manager at top New York City financial services firms, where he held company-wide responsibility for configuration management. This report is based on Bob's new book titled Agile Application Lifecycle Management, Using DevOps to Drive Process Improvement. There are several teaching points in this program. First, we'll introduce the concept of application lifecycle management and discuss why it is so critical to today's complex development projects. Next, we will ask our expert, why do we need ALM and what are the benefits? Then, a discussion about implementation and how to be successful with Agile ALM in a non-Agile world. We'll conclude with a list of best practices to keep in mind as we ramp up an ALM environment. Now, let's begin our report. In our first segment, we'll introduce the concept of application lifecycle management and learn why it is so critical to today's complex development projects. If you needed any further confirmation of the popularity of Agile and DevOps concepts versus traditional development methods, you need not look any further than the results of a recent survey sponsored by Hewlett-Packard that interviewed 601 development and IT professionals about their Agile practices. The results may come as no surprise. It seems as though the majority of organizations reported that they primarily use Agile. Here is exactly how the survey results stacked up. Of the 601 development and IT pros that responded, 61% said that their organizations were leaning toward Agile development practices. 16% labeled themselves a pure Agile shop, and 24% indicated they used a hybrid approach incorporating some Agile principles into their software development projects. Only 9% stated their approach was pure waterfall or leaning towards waterfall. Agile and DevOps have gained amazing traction over the past decade. Development teams have embraced these concepts and recognized their ability to foster collaboration, increase software quality, and deliver projects that enjoy high customer satisfaction. Let's turn to our expert, Bob Aiello, and begin our discussion on today's topic, Agile Application Lifecycle Management and DevOps. Well, Bob, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. It's my pleasure to be here.
Now, can you start by telling us what application lifecycle management is and why it matters?
Application lifecycle management is an approach to being able to understand all the different things that have to get done in order to develop software and systems. We talk about it as being a methodology, but it's really focused on helping your whole team to understand what they need to do on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's a real grassroots approach so that you get everybody on the same page completing their tasks and, most importantly, understanding what each other is doing.
And how do we get started with implementing an ALM?
So getting started with ALM should always begin by taking a look at what your existing practices are, doing an assessment. What's going well, what could be improved, and this is where we take a DevOps approach where we really look at including input from each of the different stakeholders. DevOps has a set of principles and practices that help us to improve communication and collaboration. So when we want to define an ALM effectively, we have to make sure that we get input from each of the players, each of the stakeholders, on what they need to do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, no doubt that Agile has greatly impacted how software development work is performed, but I'm curious as to why Agile is important to application lifecycle management.
So application lifecycle management has really evolved over the years. And we really got started with a software development lifecycle, kind of a waterfall approach. Agile ALM has kind of taken us to the next level where we utilize agile principles, agile practices, and, for example, understanding that changes occur very late in the life cycle. A lot of times you have to welcome the changes that occur because of industry requirements or competition. So being able to change the way your team works and making sure that everybody understands what their tasks are, what their roles are, and being able to be flexible and responsive is really where Agile ALM has shown the most value and promise. So it's really important for the Agile ALM to have just enough process so you get the job done. One of the biggest problems that I've seen organizations have is where they had so much process that it actually interfered with people being efficient and productive, and it became just a bureaucratic nightmare. So making sure that people don't make mistakes or skip steps, you want just enough process so the whole team understands what they're doing, but not so much that you really burden the organization. And that kind of results in a phenomenon where people start tight-ending the process and not cooperating because they just don't see things as being valid and useful.
Bob, what's the backstory on Agile ALM? What did it evolve from?
ALM has been around for a very long time, and it has evolved. The Agile ALM is really taking things up a step further, where we start to use agile principles and we start to be more responsive to the world that changes around us. When our customers inform us that their requirements change due to some competitive requirement or perhaps a regulatory change, I mean, just think about it. If you're a tax or financial services company and the IRS changes the rules on April 14th, you have to be extremely responsive. So you have to accept the fact that things are going to change late in the business. Companies that get good at this are very profitable. So the Agile ALM is really a key to being successful with your whole organization.
Well, the potential sounds great, but aren't there some real challenges with implementing Agile ALM? Tell us about those challenges.
So the biggest challenge that I find with implementing application lifecycle management is that folks get caught up in creating too many controls. It's important to automate this approach using a workflow automation tool or a ticketing system, but I find that very often folks have got just too many checkpoints, and the process itself becomes so verbose that nobody wants to follow it. So this is a case where having too much of a good thing can really sabotage the whole organization. So the other thing that I find is that very often folks forget to include all of the key stakeholders. This is where DevOps really helps you, because you've got to make sure that you're taking a cross-functional view and that you're including the different views from each of the different groups that are impacted by the work that needs to get done.
What do you believe to be the biggest misconceptions about ALM?
What I find is that people think that you have to define every single task, every single nuance, and that's impossible. You can't be able to define how people work in one shot. And I've done this task many different times. I've helped people define their life cycles. The best approach is to take an agile, iterative view to this. Take a first cut and be prepared to iteratively update and change your life cycle. Another thing to consider when you're developing new software or systems, in the beginning of the process, you probably don't need too many controls. As you get close to the deadline, then you really need to make sure that no one skips a step that could cause a delay. So the maturity of the process is very much impacted by the culture of the organization, the work that you're doing, and also how close you are to your deadline. I mean, think about this. The agile life cycle that you propose is a little different for nuclear power plant engineers than it would be for the next internet startup. They both have requirements that can be met by the Agile ALM, but you got to engineer that a little bit differently to be aligned with the things they need to get done.
Bob, how did you first get involved with Agile application lifecycle management?
Well, originally I was asked to help out with some deployment engineering, and that gave me an opportunity to learn how to automate different tasks. And then I found that very often I had to communicate with my colleagues. So I by creating a little workflow automation tool, we were able to make sure that everybody understood the tasks they had to do. And if I worked late one evening and I was going to sleep in the next morning, my colleague could pick up and understand what their responsibilities were. So the life cycle, by having an automated approach and a well-defined approach, helped the whole team be efficient and productive and be able to get the work done.
Next, we'll offer thoughts on how to keep development teams productive and motivated. Then we'll discuss more about Agile ALM and its benefits. We'll also hear how to be successful with Agile ALM in a non-Agile world. In the opening moments of our report, we spoke of the frenetic software development environment that exists today. The pressure to deliver high-quality applications in record time and at the budgeted cost can be an exhausting job for even the most seasoned IT leaders and software developers. So then, how can you keep a development team focused, efficient, productive, and yes, even happy, considering the stresses of the working environment? Well, in an article in IT World Online by writer and editor Phil Johnson, some guidance was offered in that area. The article, titled 9 Things You Need to Know to Run a Successful Software Development Team, tells us what experienced software engineering leaders do to get the most out of their teams. Here's the advice these development professionals offered. First, get to know your team. Second, sell the mission. The third point is to keep the lines of communication open. Fourth on the list is to shield the team from extraneous distractions. The fifth and sixth items are to always build trust and be supportive. The seventh tip for running a successful development team is to help the staff with career advancement. Eighth is to do your best to minimize meetings. And finally, the ninth idea is to, on occasion, offer perks like food and drink to keep the team humming along. Now, let's get back to our expert, Bob Aiello, and today's topic, Agile ALM. We'll learn more about the benefits and challenges that come along with this important software development concept. So, Bob, how would you respond to an IT leader who might make the comment that everything is working just fine with their development team and they really don't need Agile ALM?
Well, first and foremost, I always look at the existing practices and find out what's working well and what could be improved. Now, I've yet to come across an organization where everybody said that everything is fine. That would be great. I would love to come across it, but they're not likely to call me in the first place, I guess. So, but the whole point is to start with what's working well and then what could be improved. And I find organizations their members are very, very clear about what needs to get improved. Now, sometimes we start at different places. And for me, I've got to be very careful to not walk in there and try to fight last year's war. I have to approach this as a whole new experience and really be centered on what that team needs to fix in order to help them improve their processes. So the whole point of the ALM is to look at the organization as a whole, to really take a wide systems view and help each of the different functions be more effective by improving the way they communicate and collaborate.
Okay, let me change gears for a minute here and talk about security. Development professionals are very focused on security. Now, I'm told that ALM can help address security risk factors. Tell us how.
So one of the biggest requirements that organizations have today is to be able to respond to cyber threats. Systems get hacked. Sometimes there are human errors that lead to vulnerabilities. And the ALM is a really key aspect of how you go about addressing those kind of concerns. I mean, there's an old adage that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So the ALM helps us to understand the whole life cycle throughout the organization. And by taking a good hard look at the way each of us performs our task, a lot of times that's exactly how you find out where there's a vulnerability that could lead to some type of a cyber intrusion. So security and cybersecurity really depend heavily upon the ALM. Sometimes it's because your requirements weren't well defined, or you don't have enough testing, or maybe your architecture is using old technology that has vulnerabilities. There's so many different reasons that a problem can occur. The ALM helps you take that focused systems view from soup to nuts to be able to figure out where your vulnerabilities are. Once you understand those risks, then you can address them.
Well, Bob, you have sold me on Agile ALM. Now, how exactly do I get started?
Getting started is always a matter of first taking a look at what your current practices are. I always go into an organization and I ask them what's going well here. And I find when I get people comfortable, then a lot of times they'll start telling me what's really wrong and what needs to get fixed. So it's very important to start with an assessment. Don't fix things that aren't broken. That's not the right place to start. Sometimes I go into a group and I see that they're doing things that I've learned from other organizations could potentially be a problem down the road, but it's not hurting them right now. So then I'll advise them, well, that may not be the best approach and you might run into problems, but very often they're going to tell me that that's not really where they have the current pain. So I always focus on getting started by addressing a couple of quick hits, a couple of things that we can improve quickly and effectively, and that changes the whole culture of the organization to realizing that process improvement is a practical thing and that can help everybody do their job.
Now, tell us the steps toward full implementation.
So a really key aspect about this is continuously improving. So what I'll often do is hold a retrospective with different groups. And that is a session after something's been completed. Perhaps it's an implementation of a new system or completion of some new functions. I'll hold a meeting with that group and I'll help them understand, how do we do? What are the mistakes that we made? What went well? What could be improved? So that's really taking things to the next level. And you've got to instill a culture within the organization where people are not afraid to address mistakes they've made, that they're willing to discuss them openly and honestly, and they know that they're safe even admitting that they themselves have made a mistake. If you get that kind of culture in your organization, then you're going to be able to continuously improve and then be very successful, and particularly from a business perspective.
Well, Bob, many organizations will struggle to implement Agile. My question is, how do you handle the Agile ALM in a non-Agile world?
Well, I call this the elephant in the room. The fact is, most organizations are not very successful at implementing pure Agile practices. Some are, and that's great. For those that are, that's wonderful, and certainly Agile principles are really, really effective. But I work in that world where things are not so perfect. And very often a team has their reasons why they can't go full on Agile. And then I will help them do as much as they can, kind of in a hybrid approach. But then we're focused on process improvement. And perhaps the end game is to get as Agile as possible, but it recognizes the fact that in the real world there are often constraints that prevent you from doing things in the most optimal way. That doesn't mean you can't improve. In fact, you must improve. So taking kind of a hybrid Agile approach where we do as much as we can and realize what our limitations are is really key to being success in the real world and pragmatic environment that I often find myself operating in.
Let's talk about the skills of the development team for a moment. I'm curious about what skills individuals would need to work in a DevOps environment.
Well, in a DevOps environment, it's very important to have players who have good communication skills, that are willing to discuss what's going on. A lot of times, what I'm doing is getting people into the same room, and I'm helping them be able to verbalize what their concerns are in a non-threatening way, and then understand what the concerns of the other groups are. For example, a lot of times I find operations folks will tell me, hey, the developers didn't tell us what their requirements were. And if I get everybody in the same spot, in the same conversation, even if it's all on the phone or through a WebEx, then we learn, well, the developers were tackling a new technology. They had no idea how much memory and disk they needed. It was all new to them as well. So perhaps what we needed to really communicate here is that we were tackling a brand new set of technical requirements. So helping the team to understand what we're trying to do in order to be successful helps eliminate those kind of misunderstandings that all too commonly cause problems within the organization.
And what about the leadership of the development team? It would seem to me that in order to get an Agile ALM type environment up and running successfully, it will take a manager with great skills. Describe the characteristics of an effective team leader in this type of environment.
An effective team leader really has to be someone that can motivate everybody, make them feel comfortable, help present different points of view, avoid kind of political biases, and really, most importantly, eliminate the effects of silos. Silos are very dangerous. Now, I'm not suggesting that we eliminate particular organizational structures that may need to be in place for very good regulatory compliance or for other reasons. A lot of times there has to be a segregation of duties. But eliminating the effect of the silo by getting people on the same call, working together, understanding that they can't do this volleyball thing where I've done my part of it, so I'll throw it over the net to you, then you do your part and throw it over the net to me. Get everybody on the same page, operating towards the same goals. You know, within the Agile ALM, we talked about tasks and functions, but really the most critical resources are the people. And organizations that don't realize the value of developing the human resources really miss out a lot. So the Agile ALM helps us understand what we need to do, but it also helps us understand what are the types of skills and resources and even personalities that we need to have on the team.
Bob, that leader is going to need the support of those who are higher up in the organization, correct?
It's very important to have both a top-down and a bottom-up approach with the Agile ALM. So being able to reach out to the folks in the trenches who do the real work gives you a lot of really critical, valid information. But then getting that information communicated up to senior management, and that's what IT governance is all about, being able to communicate the real issues and problems that the team is having allows senior management to clear away obstacles. So you really have to take both a top-down and a bottom-up approach if you want to be effective with Agile ALM.
Resistance to change is a common problem in an organization. You may find a desire to keep things status quo. How do you work around a challenge like that?
Well, very often I do find that some groups are very resistant. They have been doing things a certain way. They feel threatened. They've seen situations where the organization had changes that perhaps impacted them in a negative way. So a lot of times I do see groups that will resist these sort of changes. So you really have to help them understand what's in it for them. I'll give you a classic example. I worked with one team, and these developers wanted to adopt a new deployment strategy. They wanted to adopt a new technology. And the operations guy said, no way, we have our old methods, they work for us, that's what we're comfortable with. And what I threw out there is, well, you know what, the developers are willing to put together a slide deck and train you guys up on this new technology. All of a sudden the resistance went away. The idea that the operations folks could learn some new things and really benefit from that experience, all of a sudden they were all in, and both development and operations got to where they wanted to be.
Well, Bob, by embracing Agile ALM and DevOps, you may really be influencing organizational culture. Is that correct?
The most important thing is to change the culture of the organization. It really is the key. If you can help the organization become a learning organization where they're sharing knowledge, where being able to help each other out is considered the only way to operate, then that organization is going to be a lot more successful. In fact, changing the culture of the organization yields greater benefits than even the technical things that I've been talking about. So the technical things are very important, but if I can help that team really value sharing knowledge, really value communicating better. When something goes wrong, instead of finger pointing, everybody just dives in, and no matter what, helps each other out. And most importantly, if people are not afraid to admit their mistakes and really just openly communicate, hey, I blew it this week, then that is really where the organization is going to see the most benefit.
We will conclude with best practices to keep in mind as you ramp up an Agile ALM in your organization, and also hear some parting words of advice from our expert, Bob Aiello. In today's report, we first introduced the concept of application lifecycle management, talked about why it's such a key component of software development today. We then explored why we need ALM and outlined its benefits and challenges. We then discussed implementation and offered advice on how to be successful with Agile ALM in a non-Agile world. Next, in our final segment, our expert offers a list of best practices to keep in mind in order to make the most of Agile ALM in your organization. Well, Bob, success with Agile ALM doesn't happen overnight. Give us some best practices viewers should keep in mind as they ramp up an Agile ALM and DevOps environment.
When we're ramping up, we really need to be able to work with all of the key stakeholders. And you really have to take an agile, iterative approach here. You can't always fix things the first time through. Sometimes you take a shot at it, you make some changes, you come up with a couple of controls to avoid a mistake, and then you might find out, well, we have to make another adjustment. So we're really using the agile methodology to be able to improve our agile ALM. We really have to think about what are the different aspects that each team is concerned about and take that iterative life cycle approach to be able to improve our processes. It's really key to be able to identify the key milestones. Those are toll gates. At what point does development feel their code is ready to be promoted to the next stage? That's a sign-off from development and test. What about the QA team? Perhaps they're embedded with the developers, perhaps it's a separate group. So each milestone really has to be considered. Your operations team has to really ensure that the environment is ready for change, that communication has gone out to the business end users if there's going to be any interruption in service. So each of those toll gates has to be considered, and they have to be communicated to all of the other players so that we're all on the same page. There's a real key to focus on transparency and traceability. You want to make sure that each member of the team understands what the other members of the team are doing. So that's, really your transparency. I want to communicate what I'm working on. I want to understand what you're working on. How does your step impact mine? Maybe you've got to do step 1 and then I do step 2 and then it's back to you. And then that traceability really helps the whole team understand, hey, did we skip a step? And by the way, if you're in any type of industry that's got regulatory requirements, that traceability is what the auditors are going to be looking for. It's particularly important if there's a problem, you have a systems outage. If you have well-defined processes and you've got traceability as to who signed off on each step, that actually helps your organization to be seen in a much more positive light than as opposed to if you don't have well-defined processes. So the Agile ALM can even help you if there is a problem that occurs. It really helps your organization demonstrate that you would due diligence and that you try to do all of the things that were necessary in order to be successful. Continuous testing is really something that is evolving to keep up with the fact that organizations that use DevOps approaches can deploy more often. Well, Agile depends very much on DevOps, and DevOps, in turn, has to really depend upon extremely robust testing practices. Lots of folks talk about unit testing and functional testing, regression testing, even performance testing. Well, there's new methodologies that are evolving to be able to do a much more in-the-weeds automated type of testing. It's known as API testing, or even what's called service virtualization testing, where you develop sort of robots or virtualized test assets that can help you take a more robust approach. So continuous testing is really this concept that we start from the very beginning all the way through to the end, and we develop soup to nuts a much more robust testing framework that looks at all the different aspects of the system and helps you keep your testing up to speed with your ability to deploy your code. So the most important thing is to really take an iterative approach to this. Taking small baby steps and continuously improving your processes is going to be a whole lot more effective than trying to take a big bang approach. And when organizations approach this in the right way, then their teams learn that they can improve things on an iterative basis, that every change is viewed in a positive way, and they can successfully develop the techniques to help the whole organization be more productive and really help the whole business be more profitable.
You have written that in an Agile ALM environment, teams must focus on improving communication and collaboration. Why is that such a critically important idea? Tell us about that.
Communication and collaboration is really the most important aspect of this whole journey. When teams are not effectively communicating with each other, then many, many more mistakes occur. And if they don't collaborate, then you could have lots of very skilled people, but they're not helping each other. So the real key here in the Agile ALM and taking that DevOps approach is to get each of your players involved with doing the work that needs to get done to solve the problem, to implement new features, and really help your whole organization be successful.
Bob, a final thought or a bit of advice for our viewers?
This is an iterative approach, and really involving all of the key stakeholders. A lot of times I find that the guy who sits in the basement that nobody's talked to, who's been there for 10, 15 years, he's been trying to get his thoughts out there. And when I include his views from the trenches, and I include senior management's views because they see things from a very different perspective, being able to include all the different stakeholders and really provide that cross-functional approach and taking this iterative approach to process improvement is really where I find most organizations can achieve success.
Bob Aiello, thank you very much for your insights into Agile ALM and DevOps.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure to be here.
That completes our report, Agile Application Lifecycle Management, using DevOps to drive process improvement. I'm Michael Quinlan, and thanks for watching.